Hello, my name is Julia, and this is Fanzine, where rock and roll is the best education. This episode was gonna be about Jimi Hendrix, but I just got back from the Hard Rock Hotel, and I've been on a massive 80s rock and roll, hair metal, glam metal kind of binge, so today we're going to talk about Van Halen. Eddie Van Halen always said that his family moved to America from the Netherlands with $15 and a piano. Upon moving to Pasadena, California, Eddie and his brother Alex gravitated towards rock and roll, using their classical piano training to master their instruments. Funnily enough, Eddie actually started by learning the drums, while Alex learned the guitar, but they quickly swapped and formed a band called Mammoth. They were soon joined by the always eccentric frontman David Lee Roth and bassist Michael Anthony, both members from local rock bands. After a few years of playing covers and a handful of originals at local clubs and bars, they became the most well-known band in California. It was at one of these shows that they were actually approached by Gene Simmons. Yeah, the Gene Simmons from Kiss. And he liked their sound so much that he wanted to help them produce a few songs. 6 months after that, they were signed to Warner Brothers Records and released their first album called Van Halen in March of 1978. Even though this was only their first album, it's one of my favorites, and it has some really great songs and classics that are still classics today, like Jamie's Crying, Running with the Devil. My personal favorite is I'm the One, and the jaw-dropping Eruption that leads straight into a high-energy cover of the Kinks' You Really Got Me. This album did ridiculously well in sales and thrust the band into the mainstream. And fun fact, when the album went gold, they trashed the hotel room where they were staying. I mean, they destroyed the furniture, wrote their logo on the wall, they, drank a punch and just, left everything completely trashed. And the cops came after them, but the cops didn't come after the band for trashing the hotel room. They came after one of the road crew for stealing a pillow from the hotel. So they looked through everyone's luggage, through everyone's gear, trying to find this one pillow. And I just think that's a funny little tidbit of information from behind the scenes of Van Halen. Now, David Lee Roth was an excellent showman. He was sexy, eccentric, and always boasted about sex, drugs, and rock and roll lifestyle. And he was just a really good singer, too. He fit perfectly for the band. This persona within the band garnered a lot of attention from the press and mainstream media, but musicians and fans were really attracted to Eddie's uniquely skillful guitar playing. Now, I don't know anything about guitar playing, so I can't analyze Eddie's playing, but it's just so great to listen to, and you can't deny his cultural influence, with so many musicians picking up guitars solely because of Eddie Van Halen. I mean, there's a reason that he's considered to be a rock god. He actually had to turn his back on stage so that other musicians in the audience wouldn't see his fingering or his techniques or anything like that, and I just think that's really cool. So, after the success of their first album, the band released an album every year for the next 4 years, my favorite of which, hands down, being Women and Children First. It's actually the first Van Halen record that I ever bought, and I listen to it all the time because I love the diversity of it. I mean, I think having a fast-paced, chaotic song like Lost Control on the same side of the same record as a folksy, acoustic song like Could This Be Magic is so quintessentially Van Halen, because I feel like they didn't take themselves too seriously. They cared about their craft and their musicianship, but you can tell by their stage antics and their diverse song styles and their wacky music videos that they wanted to use their skill and variety to just have a good time, and I love that. The whole album is just so crazy, feel good, and I highly recommend you listen to it. Women and Children First. It's really good. In 1979, they went on their second world record, and they really embraced this maximum energy rock and roll persona. David's confidence shot through the roof, and the band continued their streak of multi-platinum records with Fair Warning in 1981. 1984 came along, and with it came maybe the most well-known Van Halen album of all time, 1984. When people think of Van Halen, they think of this album with classics like Panama, Jump, I'll Wait, and my personal favorite, Hot for Teacher. I love that song because of Alex's drumming in the beginning that sounds like a revving motorcycle. It gets me hooked every time, and that continuous guitar riff from Eddie, it's so good. So after 1984, all of the drama starts and the history of Van Halen gets pretty complicated. I'm going to be 100% honest and say that when I say that I love Van Halen, I mean that I love Van Halen with David Lee Roth, because I'm frankly not too familiar with their work with Sammy Hagar, So I'm going to do a brief overview of what happened to the legendary Van Halen after 1984. So in 1985, not only did David Lee Roth release a solo EP, but he also delayed recording the band's next album, which caused tensions and caused him to leave the band. He was shortly replaced by former frontman of Montrose, Sammy Hagar. Their next 3 albums went multi-platinum, including 5150, which I have listened to, and it has some great songs, but I don't know, I just personally prefer David Lee Roth's style and his vocals. So the Hagar era generally had great commercial success, but tensions arose when the band wanted to do a greatest hits compilation album, which Sammy was really opposed to, given that it would include David Lee Roth songs, which he refused to perform in concerts. He didn't want anything to do with David Lee Roth. So the band claimed that Hagar left, but he continues to claim that he was fired. So they did some stuff with the singer of Extreme, which didn't last long, and in 2002, possibly the weirdest thing in Van Halen history happened when David Lee Roth and Sammy Hagar went on tour together without the rest of the band. I think this is hilarious because of all the famous hatred between David Lee Roth and Sammy Hagar, and the media, painted them to just completely hate each other. They said that they were, arch nemesis and stuff like that. And then they just went on tour together. No big deal. I think that's both great and hilarious, and just an interesting thing to happen within the structure of a band. But anyway, 2004 brought about the Best of Both Worlds album, which included hits from both the Roth and Hagar eras, and Van Halen toured the album with Sammy Hagar. Then they were inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, Eddie went to rehab, and in 2007 the brothers toured with David Lee Roth while Michael Anthony toured with Hagar. And that's pretty much the history of Van Halen. There's a lot of intricacies and rumors regarding, the feud between Hagar and David Lee Roth, but I don't want to perpetrate anything that's not true or any false hatred or false sentiments. So I'm just going to leave it at what is there as a fact, and all of just the funny memories and all of the funny things that happened between this really high-energy, spastic, eccentric band from California. So down in the comments, let me know what's your favorite Van Halen album or song, or favorite member, or favorite story that you've heard about Van Halen. Again, let me know if I've had any historical inaccuracies. I do want this podcast to be as accurate as possible. And let me know if there's any artist or band or anything that you'd like me to talk about, because I can do some research and I can figure some things out, and if I'm passionate about it, I will definitely do an episode about it. For this episode, I got most of my information from a Rolling Stones article, which I will link down below, and I also got information from a really interesting interview, which was actually done between David Lee Roth, Alex Van Halen, and Eddie Van Halen, and they just kind of talked and interviewed each other about all of their memories and wacky stuff that happened on tour. It's really interesting. I'll link it down below, and given that kind of rekindled friendship and the fact that I've heard Sammy Hagar talk a little bit in Rolling Stones articles about a Van Halen tour, I'm really hoping some sort of reunion comes along, something interesting. I don't know if any of the members of Van Halen are listening. I would really appreciate a reunion tour because they have such a great energy and I'd love to see them live. If you have seen Van Halen live, please comment below and talk about your experience. And that's the end. This was Fanzine, the Rock and Roll History Podcast. My name is Julia. Rock on and have a nice day.